Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everybody, our pre-inauguration episode.
Well, we have one more for the inauguration, right? We can squeeze one more in. I don't want to rush this. I got what, 8 days left with a sane president. I need to savor every last second. So don't push the guy off the stage. If we got one more pre-inaugural show, we got to do it.
But it's still a pre-inaugural show. I think we could agree on that.
It's a pre-pre.
That is right. So, I wanted to talk this week, Bill, about the Buzzfeed media story. Without getting into too many of the salacious details.
So we're not allowed to talk about salacious details. Is that are we playing by CNN rules on this show or by Buzzfeed rules?
Well,
or is it Kellyanne Conway rules in that they're all the same thing and we're all the worst?
I think you're getting into some. You're starting to give us fake news now, Bill. I may have to cut off your microphone. Why don't you set it? Why don't you set it up a little bit? Because I definitely have thought. Well, I'm conflicted actually. Did you see? Well, why don't you set it up and then I'll weigh in a little bit.
I mean, the basic divide here is that CNN broke the story that there was a series of memos that talked about the Russians having compromising material on Trump that was shared with the intelligence community and therefore was then part of the briefing that the intelligence community had with Trump himself. That was the CNN scoop earlier this week. BuzzFeed then followed that by saying, here is the memo, or the series of memos, that had all of the allegations, the information that supposedly the Russians do have on Trump. There's about 30 plus pages of that. They uploaded directly to the BuzzFeed site. And then you had, at the Trump press conference yesterday, CNN trying to ask a question, and Jim Acosta, and then Trump saying, you don't get to ask a question because you spread fake news. And CNN saying, we didn't share the BuzzFeed. We didn't do what BuzzFeed did. We talked about the thing exists, and that was part of the briefing. But that's it. And then Kellyanne Conway goes on to Anderson Cooper's show to conflate the two, which Anderson strenuously objected to. But Kellyanne Conway was sort of hanging on to this other piece by NBC saying Trump was not verbally briefed on the specifics of the allegations in his briefing, to suggest that CNN overplayed that part of the story. And Anderson was like, well, CNN never said that he was verbally briefed. So they got this hair-splitting situation.
Right, I think. So NBC, correct me if I'm wrong. Their argument is that there was a briefing that had these salacious allegations in it, in the physical document, and they were going to the intelligence folks were going to use it to show Trump, this is an example of disinformation that you should be aware of, or that they could try to use. But maybe they never actually presented it to him. It was in the documents that were given to him, but never actually spoken about. Is that?
I think that's what NBC said, and I believe that was based on one anonymous source. So it's hard to know exactly what happened in the briefing. At this point, there's been other coverage. There's a big story in the New York Times today. There's a big story in the BBC today. Other reporters are saying these memos have been widely circulated for some time, and we've all tried to
I heard
chase
the rumors.
down.
No, I heard. I haven't seen the memo, but I had heard the rumors. Had you heard those rumors, the salacious rumors, before? I mean, I heard it as speculation. Like, why is Trump so nice to Putin? Why won't he say anything bad about Russia ever, or even admit that they did this hacking? Like, why would he care? And people would say to me, like, well, obviously, I heard that there's a tape or pictures of him, doing these things in Russia. Had you heard that?
I am a few steps removed from the Beltway circuit as you, so I was not on the rumor chain.
Because obviously, like, John McCain apparently had gotten the memo and turned it over to the FBI.
But late, he got after the election. I mean, you have reporters saying on Twitter, I had received the memos and I was trying to chase down the specifics, and I was not able to verify them during the fall campaign.
Right.
So we know this stuff's been circulating around. We know it got as far as into the intelligence community's hands, even though it wasn't produced by them. It was produced by a private firm hired by first Republican anti-Trump people, and then after he got the nominee, there were Democratic folks that picked up the baton and paid for this firm's services, spearheaded by a guy who was a former MI6 agent. And part of the CNN story was that the intelligence community took his work as credible because they see the MI6 guy as a credible person and his Russian sources as credible people, which is not the same as to say everything in the report is true, because they thought it was serious enough to incorporate into the briefing. So as far as a media question is concerned, there is a divide, at least in the eyes of many, not Kellyanne Conway, there's a divide between reporting on the existence of the memos and sharing the actual memo, which is what Buzzfeed did.
Right. So obviously I'm a CNN political commentator, so I'm biased, but I do think that there's a distinction. And I do think that that what CNN did was appropriate, and I think what Buzzfeed did was very different. And I think that Buzzfeed that Buzzfeed made it possible for Trump and his team to conflate the two and to label everything fake news, and they kind of played into his hand with that.
I don't disagree with that. And we can talk about this other piece that I wrote later, but I wrote a piece in the New Republic where I talk about how there's an Italian-born professor now in Chicago who wrote a piece in November saying, hey, the Silvio Berlusconi, Italy, ran his opponents around in circles because they focused on his character and not the issues, and that just became part of the circus and the spectacle, and Berlusconi used it to say, look how the elites are ganging up on me, and he never really got to the substance of his platform. So focusing on alleged sordid behavior, falls into that same trap. So I agree with you politically. This probably does not hurt Trump, and one of the reasons why he probably is happy to lean into it and make the media the issue and the elites gang up on him the issue. And as far as... Go on.
I was going to say, to me, I don't know if you saw, but Chuck Todd on his Meet the Press Daily show.
I did see this.
I forget what it's called. But he had Ben Smith on,
yeah.
who runs BuzzFeed. And they had a really interesting conversation. And I have to say... I thought that Chuck Todd did a great job of really pushing back hard, and in a not sort of jerky, but in a forceful way. But I have to say, I do think Ben Smith made some interesting points in defense of what BuzzFeed did, and essentially what he said was, like, look, so. Think of like the birth certificate story, the Birthergate story. Like, those were rumors, and those rumors were, unsubstantiated. But the media at some point decided that they had to write about it and talk about it, and that was fair game. Like, And he is basically saying that this is the same thing. You had a U.S. senator who had gotten this information and had approached the FBI, that journalists and political insiders knew about this memo and were talking about it, and that CNN, a news network, had alluded to it, and he argues that in the old days there was somewhat of a paternalistic attitude in the media where the media could serve as gatekeepers, but that's just not the way it is nowadays. And he equated it, basically making the argument that like our audience has a right to know about this. What if political leaders are hearing these rumors, and then the American people should get to decide. And I don't know how I feel about that, but I thought he made a much more cogent and persuasive argument than I would have thought without hearing it.
I thought he could have made a more cogent argument, or at least a more. I'm hesitating to say honest, but I'm going to say I think he made a more honest argument. I think he used as the crutch a lot that what you said. In the old days, people did X, but now we're in this new environment, and so you have to do this. I mean, you don't have to do anything. You are choosing. You're making a choice to change the standards. Right. So there is an argument that the news from CNN's perspective is this memo exists, and it became part of an official government action, a briefing of the president-elect, but I guess both. And we are going to tell you that much because that's as much as we can verify is true. Other parts about the story we can't verify is true, so we're not going to pass that along. That's the job of the journalist, to share what is verifiable. And the Buzzfeed attitude is this memo is the story, and if I don't share with you every aspect of the story, I've not told you the full story.
And I think what a point that Chuck Todd made, which I think was valid, is there it's not a binary choice. I mean, the choice is not to do nothing or to publish an entire 35-page memo. You can redact things, but I would say, why not write the story? You could write about the existence of this memo. You could say that it's unconfirmed and suspect, but it alleges, some sexually you could have written it in such a way that that told the story, but I'll give you an example of something that I did that fits into this a little bit. So, and by the way, I think my point is it might have been more journalistically defensible had they actually done the work of telling the story and presenting it without just dumping out the document, right? So part of the job of journalism is, the gatekeeper thing does sound paternalistic, but to take information and to sort of sift through it and present it, and curate it, right? And so BuzzFeed abdicated that part of the job. But I don't know if you remember this, Bill. So back in 2014, there was that break-in at Thad McCotter, Senator Thad. Is it Thad McCotter or Cochran? I'm confusing my people here.
It's McCochran, I believe.
Anyway, so there was a senator whose wife was in a nursing home. Chris McDaniel, is that his name? How quickly we forget. Anyway, his Republican challenger, somebody associated with that campaign or supporting that campaign, sneaked into the nursing home of the incumbent senator and took photos of the senator's wife.
Thad Cochran, not McCochran.
Thad Cochran. Okay. Chris McDaniel? Let's get this straight.
That sounds right, but
we need like Tony Reale here fact checking me and feeding me this. I need to have someone This was not part of the extensive pre-interview that we did, fleshing out today's show.
McDaniel ran against Cochran.
Right. Was it Chris McDaniel?
Chris McDaniel ran against Thad Cochran in the primary.
Chris McDaniel against Thad Cochran. So a story came out that somebody supporting McDaniel sneaked into the nursing home and took photos of Cochran's bedridden wife. And this became a big story, but nobody provided the context until I did. I'm the first person, as far as I know, to explain why this happened and why this was significant. And the reason was, it's now like everybody knows, but the reason was that there were allegations that Cochran was having an affair with a staffer. And the reason that you would want to get pictures of his bedridden wife is to sort of juxtapose pictures of the senator and his staffer living it up, on traveling together, and juxtapose that with pictures of the bedridden wife. I'm the one who sort of provided the context and said, which, by the way, a lot of people knew. Nobody else would write it, but everybody, a lot of people knew about the rumors of the affair, and that. So I'm the one who sort of told that story.
Now, was there evidence? I mean, his wife was very much incapacitated, so it's not your typical affair situation. But is there evidence that there was that he had a relationship outside of his marriage? I mean, or was it just total speculation?
Well, they ended up getting married.
Okay.
Cochran married the woman that was his alleged mistress, and he was renting an apartment from her. And look, all the McDaniel people, who were very much similar to the Trump people, were attacking Cochran, and they were making hay out of this, and they wanted to expose him as a not just as a sort of squishy moderate Republican, but as a philanderer and a bad person. And look, I think ethically, you could, there is an argument to be made that says, look, his wife was completely incapacitated, and it's not like this was like a 22-year-old intern. Like this was a woman who was like, I don't know, in her 50s or 60s or something, that he had worked with for dozens of years. Like you could justify like the relationship, and like I'm not even going to get into that. But the point here is that we had two things that happened. One, there was a news story that somebody broke into a nursing home and took pictures of Cochran's wife, but nobody was explaining what everyone really knew. Everyone in the know. So all of us in the know knew why he did this. But the average American out there, we weren't telling them. We weren't telling them the story. I felt like it was appropriate for me at that moment to explain to my readers, let me tell you why this person did this, and what all of us secretly know, but nobody is telling you.
Well, putting aside the question of should we care about politicians' personal lives, let's just keep that out of the discussion for the time being. You were sharing something speculative, but not wildly speculative. There was evidence out there to suggest this was the real story.
Right, and let me just say, a week earlier, I knew about the allegations of an affair. And by the way, there were people who were pushing this. Places like Twitter, but mainstream media wouldn't touch it.
Right.
But a week earlier, there were allegations. Listen, a week earlier, 2 weeks earlier, there were allegations of an affair, but I never reported those or wrote about them because I just didn't think that was appropriate. But once the break-in happens, and there's now a in my opinion, a legitimate reason to explain to my readers the rationale, the motive for the break-in. At that point, I made the decision that it was fair and appropriate to talk about the rumors of the affair. And I think that some people, I believe that it's reasonable, although I would disagree. I think that somebody could say that was wrong of me. It's a judgment call.
Right. I think that there's a rough analogy there to what happened with BuzzFeed. I mean, it's certainly the way BuzzFeed describes the situation. It's parallel. I think the evidence of the allegations in the Trump case is much thinner. It's especially because you have reporters who have tried to chase us down and haven't been able to come up with it. Although, granted, it's a hard thing to pin down what's being alleged. How you get the evidence will be very difficult. But where I think Ben Smith was being not fully forthright in his defense was he was leaning on, well, we're in this new media environment. It's not like the old days, so you can't do it that way anymore.
Right.
He is not owning up to the argument. There's a new media environment that I, who runs BuzzFeed, can profit off of by being the first person to put this out there, and I know I can do that and make money, and I'm not going to lose my standing professionally because people will keep coming back and clicking on my stories. I mean, that's the new media environment. And
I also think that there are consequences to this. So number one, look, perverse incentives. In the short term, this is good for Ben Smith and good for BuzzFeed. The controversy and the attention, and the fact that you and I both know that although I think journalists were pretty much unanimous in saying that what CNN did was okay or appropriate, and that what BuzzFeed did was not, that Ben Smith is part of the club. He's part of the cool kids club. And he will not lose his standing, and BuzzFeed will not lose their standing. But think of the consequences of this, right? So number one, BuzzFeed and Ben Smith gave Donald Trump the ability to dismiss, a lot of CNN's report as fake news, and to attack the media, and to pat. I don't know if you saw the press conference, but he got to pat. It's almost like, speaking of paternalistic, he got to pat other media outlets on the head and say, "Good, you guys were good, but those other bad people," right? So now he's the arbiter of what's legitimate news and what's not, right? The other problem is what Ben Smith and BuzzFeed are doing is essentially basically putting us all out of a job. Like, if part of our job is to use our judgment to be, I don't like the term gatekeeper necessarily, but our judgment and our to put things into context, to explain narratives. So for example, in the case of the Cochran McDaniel thing, I felt like I was providing a service to my readers of putting things in context and explaining it to them. But if all you're going to be is a place that people can dump Oppo research, and you'll just put it out like, hey, I don't know if this is true or not. It probably isn't, but hey, you have a right to check it out. Well, that's kind of, never mind robots taking your job. I mean, that's really who needs? I just think this contributes to the attitude that they're all bad. That Breitbart is CNN, is Fox News, is BuzzFeed, is whatever. All these outlets, they're all pretty much the same. None of them can really be trusted. They're all just fake news and entertainment, right? I think it contributes to that environment, and I think it also just contributes to the idea that that the role of journalism, it's sort of self. Look, at the micro level, it makes sense, in terms of incentives. At the macro level, it's bad for the industry.
Well, there's this weird tendency, by individuals and certainly embedded by people like Trump, to treat the media like it is a literal singular club that all makes decisions in concert, which is ridiculous. It is a competitive industry with people who have different business models, and the BuzzFeed business model is to be the first to do things like this. That's what BuzzFeed is about. They want to be known as the place you go to get this kind of raw data that's not fully scrubbed.
Really?
So you can feel like you have something special that other people did, that people on the inside have.
Is that really BuzzFeed's? No, see, I felt BuzzFeed.
Part of the business model.
Well, I don't know. Look, I don't mean to be condescending here, but my take on BuzzFeed was obviously the cat photos, and then they were doing real journalism. I mean, they hired some pretty good reporters, and I didn't know. Like, I honestly didn't know that we were like WikiLeaks is the place you go for like Oppo and like you know. I didn't know that was part of BuzzFeed's brand. But
I mean, WikiLeaks is not a for-profit media organization. WikiLeaks is a political activist operation, you know, to be the most charitable. It's really not a business.
But I mean, has has BuzzFeed in the past put out like documents just sort of without vetting them? I didn't. If they have, I've missed it.
I can't say that off the top of my head, but I mean, I don't think. I mean, they do some good journalism. I'm not trying to disparage those who have done bona fide quality investigative reporting. They certainly do that. I highly doubt that's where they make most of their money. I think they make their money off of the more low rent stuff that at best funds the higher quality stuff. But I think they want to be known as an operation that is defining new standards and is breaking down barriers between the elites and the people. I mean, this is sort of a modern incarnation of the tabloid. The
funny thing, though, is I mean, it does seem to me like there are people like Donald Trump who have a political agenda, which is to muddy the waters and to basically suggest that all journalism's fake, and and then we have media outlets who are playing along with that and who are actually playing into their hands with that. It seems to me.
Well, but if you're BuzzFeed, you don't care. I mean, the basic journalist credo is that you don't care about political ramifications. You care about getting the story, and it's up to everybody else to decide what the ramifications are. So, I mean, that's not new for BuzzFeed.
Well, no, I would disagree with that. Are you saying that that's BuzzFeed's ethos, or that is an appropriate attitude of journalism?
It's a standard journalistic ethos, appropriately so, that your job is to get the story, period. You don't care about the timing. You don't care who it helps or it hurts. You get the story, you get the truth, you share it to your readers, and everything else is not your problem. Right,
but you said an important word there. You said truth.
I mean,
you said truth, and that's the difference.
BuzzFeed's standard it is true that this memo exists, and I am sharing that memo. That's the BuzzFeed standard.
Well, but I think that's the whole conversation.
Sure, but it's in BuzzFeed's 100% self-interest to be the media operation that defines truth as that. So you go do BuzzFeed more to get more information.
That's a new invention. But that's the change. That's the new invention, and that's what goes against the traditional journalism. And when I say I'm talking about the journalism, the Murrow, Cronkite, like the journalism that we kind of grew up with, because obviously, there was a time with the infamous scribblers, and really what we're sort of returning to is the days of Calendar and the tabloid journalism of. The
1800, absolutely.
Yesteryear.
We should stop getting into this attitude of the media wants to do this. There are individual media organizations, and they're going to have their own sets of standards and business models. And if you don't like what BuzzFeed does, then don't go to BuzzFeed. Don't click on those links. Well,
I know this is a segue to your "Don't Watch Trump's Inauguration" column, but I just have to say, don't you think that the problem is that? I mean, you could argue that there's a free market, and so that people that care about responsible journalism will go to responsible outlets and trust responsible places, and people who want salacious information will go to the Inquirer. But don't you think that the problem is that there is a race to the bottom, and it's like a nuclear arms race, and that once one person or one outlet decides to lower their standards, that everyone else has to in order to be competitive, because you can't let them have a monopoly on lower standards.
It is a race to the bottom in many respects. It can be exploited by foreign governments, as the Russians did. If they couldn't get a reputable outlet like a CNN to take their hacks, they would give them to WikiLeaks, or they would create their own website and put it out that way. So in that respect, like you can't stop the race to the bottom. Someone's going to put it up on the internet at some point. BuzzFeed is making a choice to profit off of that reality, but it is a choice. The best you can do as a media consumer is decide what you're going to look at and what you're going to read. If you think this stuff is horrible, then you don't look at it. And we need to have more educated consumers that even if he does come across your transom, you have the wherewithal to take it for what it is and not be manipulated by political actors that have ulterior motive. I mean, I still hear people say, well, all Russia and WikiLeaks did was tell us the truth about the Democrats, so you should be mad at the Democrats for how they rigged the election and not for what Russia and WikiLeaks did. Of course,
Trump basically said that in his press conference.
Yeah.
Yesterday. I mean...
So you should... So we need to be more resistant to manipulation, which is incredibly difficult to do as a mass populace because you can't. I can say it doesn't mean you're going to do it, but you have to understand. Anytime someone's leaking something for any reason, they're giving you a selected picture. They by definition they're not giving you the full picture. Just because it's an email doesn't mean you saw the whole email chain. Doesn't mean you heard the phone conversations that happened afterwards. Doesn't mean what they were talking about had any kind of material impact on the election. I mean, all this stuff we need to get smarter and more sophisticated about, and we're going to have to accept that people like BuzzFeed are going to exist, and people like WikiLeaks are going to exist, and we got to toughen ourselves up because of it.
Yeah, and I wonder about these sort of legal ramifications. I mean, thankfully, it's very hard to charge a journalist or a media outlet with sort of liable toward a public figure, but Trump has talked about toughening up libel laws, and are there consequences for at what point are people who leak? Maybe it's not the outlets that publish them, but the leakers. At what point are they whistleblowers versus lawbreakers? I don't know. That's a whole other topic. Right. But we have entered into a brave new world. And the rules are changing. We'll keep talking about them.
You mentioned this piece I wrote for the New Republic, which is titled "Don't Watch Trump's Inauguration," and the segue here is that you have a choice what you consume, and the act of you choosing what to consume has political ramifications. So in the case of Trump, he wants his presidency to be a spectacle, to be a circus. He wants people, and he wants the show of Trump, which is how he referred to himself back in 1990 in the Playboy. And he was asked, why do you have all these casinos and yachts and gold-plated things? And he said, props for the show. The show is Trump. And it's sold out performances. I mean, that's still the mentality here. If you are watching the inauguration, if you're watching the State of the Union address, if you're watching the press conference yesterday, you are now a prop in the show. And he will say, if the numbers are good, I had the most watched inauguration. I had the most watched State of the Union address. Just like he said, I had the most watched debate.
He'll say that he'll say that regardless.
He'll say regardless. I mean, there's always so much you can do.
You know about how he said that you can't find dresses in D.C. or something, that their inaugural gowns are all sold out.
You can't stop rampant lying, but if the numbers are transparently awful, that is also going to get reported too. But when he did have the highest rated debate, at the start of the presidential campaign, he took credit for that. And it did not factor in that many people watched because they were hate watching, or watching because it was a train wreck, or watching because it was just another episode of a reality TV show. It's fun to watch. It's not analogous to deep and loving support, but he is using that to give the impression of him being widely loved. And so if you virtually turn your back on him and say, I'm not going to watch you, I'm not going to give you my rating point, I'm not going to allow myself to react to your visuals, because he is a very visual person, And that's not the same. I got some people in my Twitter feed saying, "Oh, you want to ignore Trump? Like that's going to work." I'm not saying ignore him. You can read him. You can read the transcripts.
Yeah, I apologize for retweeting your piece because I think some of the trolls who started harassing you might have come from my feed.
That's all.
But let me just say this, Bill.
That's all right.
I think you're obviously right. But it's like saying, hey drivers out there, if there's an accident and they're pulled off to the side of the road, no rubbernecking, don't slow down, just keep going at 55, and the traffic will be fine. Don't slow down and look and gawk. Just go about your business. Like that's obviously technically true, but it's not going to happen. Like it's human nature or whatever, or just experience tells us that people individually, not thinking collectively, but individually, will stop and gawk and look and rubberneck. And so, like what you're saying is of course true, but will never happen. It's completely unworkable.
Well, I don't know. It's never going to happen to perfection, of course, because human nature exists. I do think that Trump's fiercest critics can say to themselves, because everyone on the left is grasping for straws. What can I do? What can I do? And there's all sorts of things that you really can't do. There's lots of things that are really out of your power. And obviously, the most fundamental thing one should do is to, organize for the next election or win the next election. That's the end game. But how do you maintain a focused resistance in the interim period? We all worry about being distracted by Trump, being distracted by tweets, or distracted by these press conferences, distracted by the show. Well, try to minimize your distractions. This was the point made by the Chicago professor born in Italy, that the only two people that ever beat Berlusconi treated him like a normal politician, did not go after his character, and stayed focused on the issues. And so you want to shrink the stage. Focus on the humdrum of the policies as best as you can. It's never going to be to perfection. But the more the left can do that, the left had its best moment in the Bush years when they focused on Social Security privatization. And they rallied the country behind that. They stifled. That was his first big act in his second term. It was a total flop. And it sapped his political capital, and it was the precursor for winning back the Congress in 2006. So you want to get to that point where you can focus on a specific overreach on a substantive issue, and you can't do that if you're talking about salacious things going on in Russian hotel rooms. So that I think is
but Bush was so. I agree, but obviously, but Bush was just a normal. Bush was a normal politician. Trump isn't, and you want to get to that point. There's obviously, and I think part of the understanding that is having the spectacle, having the circus is essential for Trump to thrive. So once him doing that helps him. You're not hurting him by being part of the spectacle and trying to make him seem like he is too distasteful to be in this job. We already tried that. that was the attempt going in. And I'm not saying, look, it was a very close election, obviously. He didn't win the most votes. But he clearly was able to maintain the bond that he has with his base, them full knowing what they were buying into. So harping on that point is not going to break that bond. It's going to break that bond to say he's not delivering in the way that you expected him to. Right. It reminds me a little bit, though, of when people would, like Howard Stern, people would complain about Howard Stern or some shock jock, the sort of salacious stuff they talk about. And then the shock jock would always say, well, hey, if you don't like it, just turn the channel. Like, that's, if you don't like, And I always feel like that's a cop-out because people aren't going to turn the channel. Like, the people who care, the people who feel like it's hurting our morals and our values, they may turn the channel, but the lumpen proletariat, the masses out there are gonna tune in to the spectacle, and it is over time going to change them and influence them. And so you're in a way advocating a sort of a libertarianism idea here, really.
Well, it's not every person for himself. There's an attempt of organization here, which perhaps libertarians are more anathema to. But I mean, you're not going to get the people who like him to turn it off, or the people who are indifferent to turn it off. But I think there's a big difference between having TV ratings that go beyond his base and make it seem like a spectacle that none of us can walk away from, or making it abundantly clear that he is only supported by, at best, close to half the country, if even that, and is only speaking to and connecting with a rump portion of the country. Howard Stern could be successful playing to a niche market. So people listened who loved him and hated him, but he wasn't being listened to by the majority of the country, and that was good enough to be a successful radio host. What's frustrating about this current environment is that Trump has as much power as he does, despite not winning a majority. I mean, he is still in many ways a niche candidate, although just a very big niche. So at minimum, you have to hold him to that. You don't want him to grow. I mean, Bush was able to grow his base from the first time round and become a bona fide popular vote majority winner. If you can contain the show, shrink the stage, that's not in and of itself enough to defeat him, but it's a step towards making him vulnerable enough that he can be defeated.
Well, while we're talking about some of the columns you wrote this week and the Twitter reaction, last week, I think it was last week, we talked about this miniseries.
Did I mention on the show?
You wrote about. Did we talk about it?
I know we talked about it off air. I can't remember talking about it on air.
Well, why don't you talk a little bit about it, because I think some of the Twitter feedback you got, I mean, look, this is the kind of thing where I think it could have gone either way. This story could have, you put a lot of time and energy into writing this, and it could have kind of withered on the vine. But it seems like there were some people who this resonated with.
Well, so this is a piece I wrote for Politico, the 1987 miniseries that predicted Russia's takeover of America. For those who don't know, it's the 1987 ABC TV miniseries America with a K, starring Chris Christopherson and Robert Urich and Sam Neill. Sam Neill tweeted out my piece, by the way.
Now, did that happen? Did you try to alert him on Twitter, or did he just find it?
He retweeted the Politico, the official Politico tweet.
Oh, that's cool. Maybe Google alerts or something. Yeah. That's great.
So
I got Roseanne Barr finally tweeted. I wrote a piece a couple months ago about how the TV show Roseanne paved the way for Trump, the way that the Cosby Show paved the way for Obama, and Roseanne Barr tweeted that.
Do you have a bunch of Green Party followers now?
I don't know about that, but it's kind of cool. It is kind of cool. Let's be honest. When famous people, have seen something that you've written.
Absolutely.
I mean, obviously,
we're not made of stone.
No, we are flesh and blood like everyone else.
So for those who don't remember, so there was a made-for-TV movie called The Day After, 1983, about a life after nuclear holocaust that some on the right thought was, lefty propaganda, and they complained to ABC. And Ben Stein even wrote a column sort of saying someone should do a miniseries based on the Soviet takeover of America to show what we would lose if the communists won. And ABC denies that's why they did America, but they paid Ben Stein a quitclaim fee. And in the run-up to its airing, it was massively controversial. There were tons of protests about it because they thought it was going to be right-wing propaganda. Mother Jones Magazine had a 6-article spread taking it out before it aired. The United Nations threatened to sue because part of the story is that after the Soviets didn't just take over America, but also usurp the United Nations, create a flag with the Soviet and American and UN logos in a single flag, and the occupying forces of America were technically United Nations special service units. So that's how far the controversy got. Even the UN was complaining. But then it was a big ratings bump.
Can you imagine that? That just shows you how much things have changed. Like, I think that it's like that show could potentially come out today and no one would even.
I mean, there is a show. There is a show on Netflix called Occupy, which is about the Russian takeover of Norway. That's gotten some buzz, but it's not nearly the kind of thing that is making the old country go apoplectic. Maybe in Norway, I don't know. So it comes out, and it's really slow. It's a 7-night, 14-hour miniseries. It's very slow pacing. It's not Red Dawn. It's not shoot 'em up fun. It's not Manchurian Candidate, the sort of gripping, tense thriller where you wonder who's getting assassinated here. It's slow. It's kind of preachy. I mean, you need a lot of editing, and so the ratings declined day after day, and it got kind of forgotten. Plus, the timing was terrible. It was 1987. It started filming at sort of the peak Reagan era tension. Reagan's calling Russia the evil empire, saying we've just outlawed Russia. Bombing begins in 5 minutes as a joke overheard on a hot mic. By 87, Gorbachev's in power. There's glass notes. They're admitting their economic problems.
Yeah. Rocky IV had the same dilemma.
Yeah, right. No.
Actually, I'm sorry. You know who actually had the problem was Rambo. Was it Rambo 2 or 3?
Maybe 3. I think 2 was squarely in the Cold War peak.
So there's one where Stallone goes to help the Afghans fight the Russians, and I think that the movie came out after Russia withdrew or right before. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I digress.
So it got kind of forgotten at the end of the day, but you watch it now, and it's only on VHS. There's one guy who's got the whole thing on YouTube. He broke them into 13 pieces. And there's plenty of it that doesn't fit for today because everything there is still in the framework of communism versus capitalism. So when you see Americans standing on, there's an early scene where a guy jokingly says, I want, Aunt Jemima pancakes with real maple syrup and pork leg sausages, and the response is, all we have are soybean cakes and molasses, and that's better for you. That kind of stuff, America would never put up for. That stuff was sort of ridiculous back then and ridiculous today. But when you hear because there's lots of commentary, why did this happen? How did we let the Russians take us over in a bloodless coup, which is the story takes place 10 years after the fact. They don't actually show you much of the coup.
So that's where it's different than, like, say, Red Dawn was not bloodless. So this is like actually more appropriate to what people are afraid of now.
So it's a bloodless coup. America, a demoralized America that's sort of given up on the essence of democracy, allows Russia to come in. And there's lots of various talk about how one of the Russians says, you lost your country before we even got here. That's kind of like the summation of the entire miniseries. And so you can look at that attitude and apply it to today when here's Russia. I mean, Russia manipulated the election in 1988 in this miniseries. They manipulate the 2016 election. Whether or not you think they were the final factor or not, there's obvious interference. And a lot of people say, America does this stuff too. What's the difference? We do weird things. Trump is in the campaign was pointed out, Putin kills journalists. America kills people too. That attitude.
Trump said that. Trump said that on Morning Joe.
Yeah, Trump said that. So
he implied that.
This is a direct degradation of belief in what we talk making America great. It's supposed to be that we are fully democratic. That is supposed to be the definition of what makes America great. Not that we have better trade deals. Like, that's not any country can have better trade deals. America is supposed to be the beacon of democracy. And there's a line in the miniseries from Devin Milford, who's a John Kerry-like figure who ran for president in '88 at the last gasp of freedom and then gets imprisoned and becomes the face of resistance. You see footage of him in the campaign saying, if the dream of democracy can't survive in America, it can't survive the 20th century. Putin has a deliberate agenda of having Americans believe and the world believe that there's no difference, that we're all awful, we all do terrible things. There's no beacon of human rights here. When Russia conducts genocide in Syria. That's what countries do. We operate on our national interest. We don't have an international order that upholds a human rights standard. That's the goal here. And there are people in America, including Trump, who have abetted that framework. So knowing that and watching the miniseries, because I still have people come to me saying this was still wingnutty propaganda then and it is now. And obviously there's elements of it that don't apply, but there's some that do, and some that should ring alarm bells at what's actually happening here.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the feedback you got. I mean, on Twitter and the kind of response you got, because I think that's interesting. Like, first of all, the fact that anybody would remember this is noteworthy, and the fact that this piece could have fallen on deaf ears. It could have been that you were the only person to remember that this show even happened. But it's kind of cool that other people remember, and then some people try to correct you.
I got people coming at me saying I never heard about this, or some saying, "Oh, I barely remember this. Managed to go check it out." And then some saying, "Oh, I totally remember this. It was awful," or "I totally remember this. This was awesome." And then there are the people who start nitpicking. You didn't mention the electromagnetic pulse attack, which is what this.
Was there an EMP attack?
Well, there was an EMP attack mentioned in the novelization of the miniseries. It wasn't explicitly mentioned in the movie itself. There's some allusion to knocking out communications, but it doesn't specify exactly what happened. And so I have some people saying, you didn't mention EMP, so your whole analysis is bogus, as if we're talking about a fictional product here, people. So let's not get too uppity. But I mean, the theme of the movie is not beware of electromagnetic pulse attacks. The theme of the movie is remember what makes America great, so when people try to overtake you're able to resist. That's the point. But people get very hung up on we talk about things that are of less import. The fights are fiercest where the stakes are smallest. So I had a bunch of EMP discussions on Twitter.
Well, fascinating stuff. I think it's awesome that, let's just say, old guys rule, and the fact that it's one of the things we can do is I probably told this story before, but during the 2012 campaign, Obama said something about I wasn't born. He was running against Mitt Romney. And he said, I wasn't born with a silver spoon in my mouth. So I came out of my office singing, "Here we are, face to face, a couple of silver spoons." And literally nobody in my office, well, in fact, they thought I was actually going insane. And I had to explain that there was this show called Silver Spoons. And it actually had, who's the guy, Carlson from the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air was in it. Right. And Jason Bateman was in it, Ricky Schroeder.
Yep.
But they had no recollection that there was a show called Silver Spoons, and thought I was insane. So if nothing else, we can bring back some 80s references.
So one interesting response I got, and this was from a British journalist, I think at the Financial Times, if I remember correctly, who tweeted back to me, there was a British sitcom in the 80s about the Soviet takeover of the UK called Comrade Bob. Episodes which you can find on YouTube. A sitcom. And it's the
you know what? If we can make a sitcom about a German concentration camp,
right? Hogan's Heroes. For those who don't know,
then you can make a I mean, isn't that a bizarre thing to make? In all honesty, if someone had come to you and said, "I got a pitch. Let me just give you the pitch for this show. It's a comedy about a concentration camp." I guess you could do a comedy about Russia taking over your country.
And it was all about this hapless dad who was trying to be a good soldier in the revolution while everyone's complaining about food shortages. He's like, enjoy your beetroots. Beetroots are good for you. It's very analogous to America. Sounds hilarious. There's more 80s era Cold War art and culture to consume to disturb you about what's happening today. I think it's because this is not a debate about way of life. This is not communism versus capitalism. This is not about your freedom to eat pork and not eat beetroot. The stakes seem smaller to people. The notion of the fabric of democracy is not the same as way of life. It seems less integral. And so there are people who I think are far more sanguine about that being corrupted, thinking, this goes back to, we talked in past show about what happened in the 30s and the Great Depression, where people were on the verge of giving up on democracy and thinking, well, this doesn't work. I guess we need to have a fascist strongman or a communist strongman.
I feel like everything's been muddied. There's no moral clarity. What's the old song, Dave Mason? There ain't no good guy. There ain't no bad guy. We just disagree. I mean, just like, don't you feel like it's all been grays and like, it was very clear in the 80s. Reagan, I think one of the things that he did was assign the evil empire status, and we win, they lose, and like people made fun of it. He's a cowboy. It's Manichaean or whatever, but like. It just does seem like things are really. Everybody's bad. Everybody has fake news. Everybody kills journalists.
And that's a deliberate strategy, from Putin and his government to make you think that way. But
we're susceptible. But we're also more susceptible to it now for a variety of reasons, which we could write a book about.
Absolutely. And I think
there's an idea.
And I'm not arguing that what I'm saying is such a simple thing to execute, but we are a divided country in many respects. We are culturally divided. We are geographically divided. We are racially divided. And
I think the irony is even some of the Trump supporters could say, well, that's part of the problem with having all these immigrants coming in.
Well, I mean, it all feeds into that. I mean, it feeds into that.
We would be more unified. We would have an identity.
But we have Ronald Reagan, of course. Ronald Reagan, who unified the country around opposing communist way of life, was also very welcoming of immigrants. I mean, he did not. I mean, some people on the left remember things like the welfare queen stuff. It's not that he never played, wedge politics, but he had lots of unifying messages that were not just anti-communist.
Well, trust me, that's why I'm a conservative today. I mean, that rhetoric, that was part of what attracted me to conservatism.
Right.
And then.
So I don't think Democrats have to abandon. I don't think Democrats have to abandon the multicultural message because of this fact. We need to get back to what is the unifying thread, and what has always been the unifying thread is that America is, where modern democracy began, and is the beacon for that in the world. And if we lose that, it's not just that we change our own system. There are global implications if America is no longer a beacon for democracy, and if we lose,
and so that's basically saying that we're a propositional nation, that what binds us together is a proposition, and what the alt-right says is they're called like identitarians, and part of what they say is that there is this huge problem that America is divided now, and that we don't believe in the same things, and that we don't have an identity, and that part of that is the fact that we have all these, immigrants and diversity. The diversity's problem, and that it's hard to sort of have unified beliefs and values when you have all these different people sort of mixed together. I don't agree with it, but my point is, part of the reason that they are resonating, that their idea, which I disagree with, is resonating, is because there really is a problem. I just disagree with their cure for the problem.
Well, why don't we leave it on that note, sir?
On that happy, upbeat note.
Right.
We should have stuck with the 80s.
When everything
was a happy
good.
Note. Let me just say, it all comes down to if you really want to know what this election's about, it's all hidden in WKRP in Cincinnati. Watch that show closely.
That is one of the best TV shows.
It will explain everything that's happening right
now. So we have one last show in the age of Obama. I'm working on my Obama legacy column for Real Clear Politics right now. I don't know if you're planning anything Obama related before the end of sanity. But I'll be prepared to discuss the legacy on our last show.
Well, the legacy is what we got. The legacy is Donald Trump. And
let's not besmirch the whole thing now.
Okay. Well, thank you for tuning in, and check us out on Twitter at DMZ Show. Read Bill's pieces, as in New Republic and Politico magazine.
Thank you.
And we'll see you back here in the DMZ next week. Thanks, Bill.
Take care.